Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here. We're so excited. Yes, you are in this session. This school counselor is anti-racist. It's being presented by my colleague, Lacey Harris, and myself. I'm Janine Lazat. We're so glad to be with you here today. We are both school counselors, so really in the field, doing the work, hopeful to share some of what's been working for us that can hopefully work for you and your programs as well. Oh, excuse me. So welcome. We're so glad that you're here for today. We're going to go over what brought us here, why we decided that this work was important work for us as counselors to do, some outcomes for today, some historical background to really root us in the knowledge of where a lot of these systemically racist practices have come from, best practices for your counseling practice, and then real life. How can you actually take what we're talking about and put it into action in your school with your kids on your campus? So what brought us here? Lacey, what brought you here today?
What brought me here? Well, one, I am a San Diego native. So when I heard about this, I was like, ooh, I have to participate and present. I come from the La Mesa Spring Valley School District. I went to Monte Vista High School, Parkway Middle School, and I can't remember my elementary right now, but I definitely wanted to be a voice. I am, as an educator, as a counselor, as an advocate for marginalized communities. I am about social justice and supporting our students in their mission to go to college and beyond. And so specifically why I wanted to do the presentation for this call to action, because we do this work and it doesn't sometimes have a title, right? We call out things in our everyday practice, and we now, sometimes get these buzzwords, and this term anti-racist really popped up and resonated. And so in the work that we do every single day, I wanted to be part of a solution and sharing out my experiences, sharing out my feelings when it comes to racial injustice, when it comes to police brutality, when it comes to systemic oppression of groups of people. It's really important that we talk about it and we have the difficult conversation instead of running from it, because if we don't start getting comfortable being uncomfortable, things are never going to change, or things are not going to change in the way that we need for our young people to be successful. So that is why I am doing this work. Janine, how about you?
Well, I grew up in Michigan, so grew up in the Midwest in a very homogeneous environment. My high school was almost entirely kids that looked like me. And it wasn't until I started my graduate coursework that I started to understand my own white privilege and systemic racism and all this alternate reality that other people were living in that I really had no idea about because I was living in such a place of privilege. So my work as a counselor has always focused around anti-racist practices, but especially after the murder of George Floyd. And I saw a renewed, or really the first ever momentum among some of my white counterparts and my colleagues and my friends from high school who were really seeking information and wanted to know, like, what can I do? I'm ready to do the work. And so that brought me, it put the seed in my head, like, I gotta step out of my comfort zone a little bit. And so I'm here today, Lacey and I are here today to share with you kind of both of our perspectives so you can take what works for you and hopefully walk away with some thoughts that will help to shape your practice as you move forward. I just want to read this quote out loud because I like it so much. We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. So just to give us some foundation here that disagreement is okay, healthy discourse is okay, and also making sure that where is that disagreement coming from, making sure that we are acknowledging the humanity and the human rights that everyone deserves. So after this session,
can I add one more thing? Yeah.
Please,
so
please.
One of the things that we also wanted to share is that This can be, again, an uncomfortable space, or it can be sometimes uncomfortable to talk about. We are not the all-knowing about anti-racist best practices. We are also learning and wanting to just share, our experiences as well. So as we go through this presentation, and it's going to be interactive, we'll ask you to add to the chat. We'll ask you to be in breakout rooms and share in discussion spaces. Don't be afraid to, this is a safe space. We want this to be a safe space for you to have these discussions. If you don't know something, we can ask each other, we can find the resources if we don't know. So I just wanted to add that piece to the beginning.
Yes, you are safe here. And as doesn't mean you're going to be comfortable, just means you'll be safe. So there might be some uncomfortable moments, but that doesn't mean we can't talk through them. Counselors, by the end of this presentation, will be able to define and understand the terms related to anti-racist counseling practices, also to address the needs and concerns regarding anti-racist practices within a school system, and to develop a goal or action plan to ensure that your program is actively anti-racist. So like KID President says, it's time to get our learn on. So we are going to hear from Ibram Kendi.
And as you watch the video, we want you to just think about what he's saying, what stands out to you, because we'll ask you to share in the next slide.
Yeah, and in particular, how what he's saying could relate to you as a school counselor or as a school system.
Has always been denial, and the sound of that heartbeat has always been, I'm not racist. And so what I'm trying to do with my work is to really get Americans to eliminate the concept of not racist from their vocabulary and realize we're either being racist or anti-racist. We're either expressing ideas that suggest certain racial groups are better or worse than others, superior or inferior than others. We're either being racist or we're being anti-racist. We're expressing notions that the racial groups are equals, despite any cultural and ethnic differences. We're either supporting policies that are leading to racial inequities and injustice, like we saw in Louisville where Breonna Taylor was murdered, or we're supporting policies and pushing policies that are leading to justice and equity for all. And so I think we should be very clear about whether we're expressing racist ideas, about whether we're expressing supporting racist policies, and admit when we are. Because to be anti-racist is to admit when we expressed a racist idea, is to say, you know what, when I was doing that in Central Park, I was indeed being racist, but I'm going to change. I'm going to strive to be anti-racist. And to be racist is to constantly deny the racial inequities that pervade American society, to constantly deny the racist ideas that pervade American minds. And so I want to build a just and equitable society. And the only way we're going to even begin that process is if we admit our racism and start building an anti-racist.
So want to hear in the chat box from you what stuck. So in the video or in the chat box, please share how you think that video applies to you as a school counselor, or maybe how it applies to you and your program or your school systems. Two quotes that stuck out to us as we were watching that were either being racist or anti-racist. And also that final snippet from him, to be anti-racist is to admit when we express a racist idea. So in the chat box, we're looking for a couple brave souls to share. How do you think that video, those words, these quotes could apply to you as a school counselor, or what are they making you think? What's coming up for you as you're starting to think about your program with an anti-racist lens? And you've carved out this time in your day to take the time to do that. Yes, I love that. I'm seeing admit when you are wrong, right? There is so much. Pick a team, racist or anti-racist. I love that one too. Thank you so much. Yes, we are either being anti-racist and working to disrupt racism in intentional ways, or we're not. Yeah. Also being able to look at our own biases, our own, as a counselor, where are times that we have made mistakes, we have supported systems that we shouldn't have that were racist. Yeah, and being open to other perspectives. And thank you so much. Taking an honest look at what we're doing, and allowing ourselves the space to say what's been going on is not okay. We need to change it, you know? So awesome. Thank you so much. So as we start kind of talking about race and we're starting to feel some things bubbling up, maybe some of us are like, oh, I know just what to say. And some of us are like, oh my goodness, I'm not sure where to go from here. We want to do a word cloud. So these will all be anonymous. If you go to www.menti.com and the code is 9213873. And I'm also going to switch it to the other one so we can see it. And you're just going to put what feelings come up when people talk about race. So as people talk about race, what comes up for you? Again, the code is 9213873. And we're going to start to populate this word cloud. We've got Pooh Bear thinking with us. Some really common, oh, I'm seeing some stuff in the chat. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. So what feelings come up? Like Lacey had said earlier, and thank you so much to Christina Moya for pointing this out. We need to get comfortable with getting uncomfortable. It's stuff that we need to talk about. So maybe some of the feelings that are coming up are uncomfortable feelings for you. We're just, Menti is thinking.
I'm gonna add mine in there too.
Thank you. Load it. Did you add yours, Lacey?
I did. Isn't that showing up?
No, I'm not sure why. All right, well, if you wrote something in the Mentimeter, will you just pop it in the chat box if you feel so comfortable doing so, or if you don't want to share with everyone, you can just send it directly to one of us about what are some feelings that are coming up as people talk about race. Think about your holiday gatherings. Think about your district meetings. Think about going on a date. Think about that conversation with your spouse, right? Like what comes up? Okay, so we've got lots of them. So you were filling out my Mentimeter. It just wasn't sharing what you were saying, but I'm seeing a lot of discomfort, misunderstandings, guilt. Yeah, that white guilt for me can get in the way sometimes of me doing the work. It can cause me to kind of sit in my own guilt instead. Thank you for that. Okay, thank you. I have to press S.
So some of the other ones.
There they are. Thank you so much to Sarah. So we're seeing discomfort, uncomfortable, anger, passion,
hoping,
disconnect,
cautious, triggering, worry.
Thank you so much for pointing out that word triggering, because we want to acknowledge that during this, if you need to take a step back, if you had a traumatic experience as a student with a counselor within the school system, you might want to take a step back, take some deep breaths, how to really take care of yourself. So in this Menti, we see that there are so many different feelings as we start to talk about this. There are people who are feeling really confident, people who are feeling really discouraged, and people who are feeling really uncomfortable. And that's the truth, right? That's the gamut that we run when we talk about race, when we carve out this space in our day to talk about race. But we're so glad that you did, because it is, oops, my apologies, because it is so important. So continuing on, we want to make sure that we're all founded in the same terms to know, that we're all kind of using the same definitions as we are moving forward and talking. So the first one is systemic racism. So really understanding that racism is a system of advantages and disadvantages that are based on race. It is prejudice or discrimination against someone based on the race. This is the part I love the most, that prejudice plus power equals racism. That power is such an important component of racism that we need to keep in mind. How do we wield power, right? Also, anti-racism. Anti-racism is actively working against racism. Like we said in the chat, you got to pick a team. You're either anti-racist or you're racist. So it's anti-racism is making that commitment to resisting unjust laws, policies, and racist attitudes. Also bias. So we are going to talk about our own personal biases. And that's just our personal preference for or against an individual or group. It can interfere with your judgment, even when you don't know it's interfering with your judgment. That's the sneakiest kind. Also dominant culture. So dominant culture is the group of people in society who hold the most power and are often in the majority. So in the US, when we're thinking about it, we're thinking about people who are white, middle class, Christian, cisgender. They are the dominant culture, right? And so they're in charge of the institutions and have established behaviors, values, and traditions that are considered the norm. And anything outside of that can be considered outside of the norm. Microaggressions are those statements, actions, or incidents that are indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination that people experience daily in their life, that you may have hurled a microaggression against someone without realizing it, or maybe you did realize it. Also stereotypes, so a common, oversimplified, or distorted view of a person, thing, group that is not based in any fact. So as we are having this discussion, we just wanted to make sure that we had foundational ideas of where we all are. So we've thrown a lot at you, but this is a great graphic from Lindsay Bramman. She has an Instagram if you want to follow her, but I love the way that she drew this out to help me understand the spectrum of racism and to really go along with what we heard earlier from Kendi around you're either being anti-racist or racist. So we're going to pause for a moment. We so rarely take a second to just stop and think about how we're feeling and what's come up for us. What do your feelings tell you about where you are right now in your anti-racist journey? Like Lacey said earlier, rather than just dismissing that uncomfortable feeling, sit with it and listen to what it's trying to teach you. If dominant culture kind of put up a red flag for you, you didn't like that. You didn't like that might be something for you to think about, right? Your feelings trying to tell you something. So really taking a second and looking, where on this are you, right? There's overt racism, right? What we see as overt white supremacy. And then there's anti-racism. And then here is kind of where most people who deny racism probably are, right? What I like most about this is, as Americans, we often want to say, are you racist? I'm going to check yes or no. And then I don't have to do any more work, right? The work is taken away from me because I get to say, no, I'm not racist. I've never said the N-word, right? But really flipping that, and rather than giving yourself the out, I'm not a racist, I don't have anything to do, and thinking about yourself on this spectrum instead, and thinking about how each of your actions can fall anywhere along this, and modifying your actions and taking the moment to change and learn from them is the most important thing you can do. So that said, we've got good news. The good news is racist and anti-racist are not fixed identities. You can be racist one minute and anti-racist the next. So what we say about race, what we do about race in each moment determines what, not who we are. So really taking away, it's a growth and it's a lifestyle. It's something that we're going to work on forever, that we're going to journey on forever. So Lacey's going to take over from here, and I will share in the chat box the presentation, Lacey.
Okay, awesome. So next is our call to action. Now that we have a foundation of understanding, or we're like digging deep and kind of thinking about what race means for us, now we want to look at best practices. We want to look at what we do on a daily basis, right? We don't want it to be a one-time formula. We don't want it to be just one lesson that gets incorporated into when we go into the classroom or sharing out with teachers and our staff and our students. We want to make this a daily practice, right? We want to think about how we are contributing to systems that don't always support students of color, our marginalized student populations. And so we want to make this a call to action. We want to have some strategies in our back pocket so we can support the youth that we work with. So So in our reflection, we want to think about who holds the power, and we can put this in the chat, right? When I think of the organizations that I've worked with, they've been predominantly white, or, you know, I've had predominantly white women, and I haven't seen a lot of folks of color in particular positions of power. So I want you to think, if you're at a large district, who holds that power? Who are the decision makers within your district? And then even going from, let's say, the top down. If you're at a charter school, it might be your CMO, right? Who makes those decisions? Who communicates with your principal at the site level to make certain decisions when it comes to discipline, when it comes to curriculum, when it comes to school culture on campus? Who are these folks who hold that power? And then in the contrast, how can we disrupt racist systems or institutionalized things that have been historical within either the district or the organization, right? And so if we know that there are not many people of color in positions of power, how are we making sure that our students, right, are receiving what they need to feel comfortable on campus, to feel connected on campus? Because that's really what we want. We want our students to learn about different cultures and different histories in and outside of the classroom. So as a counselor, we want you to think about how you can disrupt these systems that have historically been maybe within our organizations or our districts. So to have an anti-racist school counseling program, right? We want to do a variety of things. You may already be doing this, and that's awesome. If there are things that are not on this list and you're doing, please add them to the chat, because we want to hear from what you're doing on your campus as well. And so when we talk about anti-racist, we're talking about putting information at the forefront. We're talking about giving opportunities to students who normally may not have the largest voice, right? Or have the highest GPA. Are we intentionally looking at the data, the information that they need? So some of the things that we thought about were exposure to colleges. You know, a couple years ago at the high school I was at, I realized there were no HBCU pennants up. We had the UCLA, we had the Berkeley, we had Stanford, we had Princeton, right? But where was Howard? Where was Clark Atlanta University, right? We didn't have diverse colleges for our students. And yes, we are promoting a college culture, but are we only promoting certain kinds of colleges that have been shown to us as these prestigious colleges, right? We want to also allow students to make choice and decide whether, you know, what kind of community do they want to be a part of. If they haven't, you know, been in a community that's as diverse, they can go to a Black college, right? And have that exposure. Core counseling curriculum that's reflective of your student population, whether it's reflective of your student population or it explores other diverse ethnicities as well. We want to make sure that students are exposed. So when you're doing your lessons, how are you approaching, or what names are you using? Things like that, that we necessarily weren't conscious of, but we should be conscious of, right? Schools used in examples offer tours at college fairs. So again, connecting students to diversity of colleges, as opposed to just one standard, just like, oh, CSU, UC. No, like there's so many colleges that our students can go to in like different communities, different towns, with different emphasis on majors. So we want to make sure that we're exposing them to everything that's out there. Advocating for culturally responsive curriculum in the school. Again, this is not something that you just do one time and you're done, but you want to think like when you're visiting those classroom spaces, or, you know, you're going in and presenting, what kind of books are you bringing in? What kind of resources, and who is creating those resources, right? When we're watching videos or sharing out videos, do you have diverse perspectives? because students, they need representation. They need to see themselves in what, and they connect to you that way when you also connect them, right? Who are the heroes in the stories? Are we talking Black Panther as we're talking about Superman, right? And so we want to make sure that, again, we are exposing our students to everybody in different aspects of culture that's out there. So again, this is rooted in the work that we do, and it has to be intentional. And so something that I really appreciated, there was another school counseling presentation. And so this really stood out to me. School counselors recognize and affirm the wholeness and humanness of students, families, and their communities through their work with students and the systems in which they learn and develop. Yet many school counselors recognize that schools continue to operate in ways that harm Black and Brown students. So I think of, when I do a data dive, you know, who are the students who are not performing at standard level? Even in the research, we're seeing that our Black and Brown students in our special education populations are not meeting the educational standards that they should be. And so what is creating that gap? Why does that gap still exist, right? Is it behavior that we're not addressing? Is it discipline policies that are inappropriately affecting certain groups of students, right? And so within this work, we also have to look internally, right? We have to have awareness of our own biases. We have to look at our own practices and how we are communicating certain ideas to our students, awareness of systems that oppress groups of people, right? And so digging deeper than just civil rights. Like, are we looking at police brutality? Are we looking at what's happening within the communities to this day, right? And how are we being proactive? It's about advocacy and action. We go into this profession because we want to be advocates for young people. We want to help them grow. We want to help them learn. We want to help see them be their best selves. And so how can we look internally and then be able to support them? And again, this is an ongoing practice. This is something that we get a chance to reflect on and, work collaboratively, with each other on every day. So on that internal side, how bias and privilege appears in school counseling, these are some of the things that we've discussed. So looking at course selection, our students, are certain students being able to take AP and honors courses or ASK because they're on a certain track, right? The belief in students' ability to succeed, sometimes having a deficit mindset. Well, they're from this community, or, their parents have experienced this. So, we don't want to put too much on them. No, we want to challenge our students. We want them to rise above what maybe they have experienced in the past. So we need to have that growth mindset that, if something is happening outside of school, how do we get them to that next level? Are we looking at data? Are we in the room with teachers so we have a voice in that discussion? The discipline and referral process, that was something that was big for me too, and eye-opening to see, how many students are receiving referrals. I know that with distance learning, it looks different, right? Because we're not on campus. But this is an opportunity where if you're seeing the data and certain students are disproportionately being affected, how can you as a counselor be an advocate? What programs can you bring in that will support student success? Also, district hiring practices. So how is your district hiring administrators? How are they hiring teachers? Is there an effort to bring in diverse people that reflect the student population? In counseling training, sometimes I know I have felt like I was on an island and I didn't have access to trainings like maybe the teachers or admin did. And so I really had to connect with my colleagues and other counselors from different campuses to talk about what's happening in the counseling world, so I could, be up to date in my practice. And then we're exploring personal bias. Examine messages you were told growing up. That's so important, right? Because what are the messages that we heard from our parents? Something that I had a classroom lesson on dehumanizing language for all of our students at our school. And one of the things that kept coming up for students was like, yeah, I learn about social justice and I learn about patriarchy and I learn about homophobia and these things in my class and how to disrupt that. But then when I go home, my parents have this certain idea, or they're watching this certain kind of news, and they still have these same prehistoric ideas of race and culture and biases against certain people. And so it's hard for me to, have those conflicting ideas. And so I can only imagine as adults, right? As the things that we're going through, the things that we've seen in the news, right? We're having to talk to our family members about what's not okay and what you will and will not stand for. So it's examining the messages that you had growing up. What were your family belief systems? What were those written and unwritten rules about where you could go? Thinking about like where you could go within your community. Were you told, oh, you can't go to that side of town for whatever reason, right? So thinking about those things. What are some groups of people who have not had much experience or that you don't know about, right? How are you connecting with other people that don't have the same background as yourself, right? And so that leads us to courageous conversations, right? Because of all of these things that are external, a lot of them not within our control, but this is, right? Now we have the control to have courageous conversations, to talk to one another, to ask questions, to research, to dig a little bit deeper so we can be more impactful. So what does it mean to have courageous conversations? I know for me, it's speaking out. It's being anti-racist, right? It's speaking out about things that I don't see helping our students, that are holding our students back, or systems that are old and tired and need to go, right? And so when it's working with students, I tell them, I'm going to keep it 100 with you, right? If I know something, I'm going to talk to you about it. If I don't know something, I'm going to go and figure it out so I can have a response for you. But I think the one thing that we can do with students is be transparent and be honest and have the conversation. Doing the research, right, to be able to address tough topics. Don't completely rely on your Black colleague, your Latina colleague, because something happened to a Black or Latino student, right? You want to make sure that if that colleague wasn't there, that you are going to approach that situation in the same way with love and care and nurturing, to make sure that student feels safe and respected on your campus. And if you don't know something, it's okay to say that. Students appreciate that way more than not having an answer or giving them some false idea of an answer, right? And so that goes into acknowledging what you may or may not know. And find resources that will support the student's needs. So if you don't have something in that moment, circling back with that student to address a particular issue. And then working with admin.
So can I add one thing, Lacey,
Yep.
about working with students? So along with this is the best place for you to model that growth mindset for your students, to be able to say, I don't know, or I don't get it, or I don't, I need to do some more research on that, or can you tell me more about what that experience was like for you, and really model that for them, because that's when they're watching you the closest, right? When they realize you don't know what to do. Like, we've all had that moment where there's a kid that you're like, oh, they know I don't know what to do right here. Yeah. And so being able to say, like, I need some time. I'm a human too, right? And modeling that for them, because really that's when they're watching the closest. And that's when they're going to be able to say, in 5 months, oh yeah, Miss Harris took some time to research this or look into it or whatever. Like, I should do that too before diving into it. So they're watching us all the time. And so I've had moments where I didn't know what to say. And I've said to students, like, I need some time. I need some time to think about this. I need some time to work on this. And that was really important for them. So thank you, Lacey. Dive into admin.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So on the admin or even the colleague side, right, how are we examining current systemic and institutional practices at your site? Again, looking at discipline data, looking at your academic data, looking at the California dashboard. I will say that I didn't look at the California dashboard as much until more recent years. And so this really gives an eye-opening look into how our students are doing. And so I want to know like how students are doing in California, and then how our students are doing on our at the site level, right? So I can figure out what are different ways that I can approach my counseling practice as a academic and a college counselor, right? What equity gaps are there that needs to be addressed? You know, how are you recruiting students? If, you know, you're at a charter, are you going to different middle schools? That's something that we definitely looked at as we wanted to diversify our population. Which middle schools, what areas are we going into? Are we expanding enough so we can get a diverse group of students that are on our campus? Policies that are in place that disproportionately impact Black and Latino students. I always go back to discipline because that's where my experience was at the middle school and the high school level. And, you know, noticing that gap where Black and brown males were the ones who had the most discipline. So how can then I bring in community partners that focus on work with this particular group of students to help them excel, to help them think about themselves in positive ways, and as an addition to what we were, you know, doing on our campus. So, and then how and what spaces do you approach these issues, right? Are we silent? Are we afraid to have these conversations? Because it can be scary at times. You don't know what the response is going to be, but as we talk about being anti-racist, we have to confront things that don't feel right to us, things that are not supporting all of our students, especially when we see what the data says.
One more thought on working with admin. It's also building the capacity of your admin, of your staff, of your teachers. I'm seeing a lot of people in the chat like, we would do this with our staff for sure, because if there's externalizing behaviors that are a result of cultural differences or whatever it is, like working with your staff and your admin to build up their capacity to see those as cultural differences, like calling out in class, right, is maybe something that's just culturally different. And so how can the adults adjust, right? Like we are the adults, we're in charge. We need to be the ones that adjust to make the spaces more safe for our students. So building the capacity within your staff, within your admin to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to address one of the questions. What community supports did you bring in to support these groups? Great question. So there was Social Justice Learning Institute that I had originally worked with years ago. It was a Black-owned company or organization, and they focused on Black males in high school or middle school at the time, and had their own curriculum, and came in and worked with a teacher, any like 8th grade teacher on campus who could put that into like their college prep space. And so we made it a school day program. So it was incorporated into the school day so our young men could be part of that program. And we were able to finagle it to where all the boys were able to get that program. We also had what is called Empower Her for our young women. And so they had an opportunity to have mentors. Mentorship has been one of the strongest interventions, I will say. I also worked with the local colleges. So Cal State Dominguez was closest to my middle school, and they had a program, the Male Success Alliance program. And they had young men, BIPOC, who were mentors. They came in and taught students lessons. They worked with the students on like improving their grades. So they had meetings with them on a maybe like bi-weekly basis. It was a lot of coordinating on the counselor side, but it definitely was worth it. Once everything started rolling, you know, they knew where they were going. I gave them schedules in their set of students. And so those were programs that really, really helped. Their sororities and fraternities that have community programs. I just connected with Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, my sorority. And we have them working with our sophomores and juniors, and they're going to help them in mentorship, academic supports, helping with the college program. And so I'm the 11th and 12th grade counselor. So I'm doing like all of the maneuvering with colleges and making sure that they're A through G ready and all those things. And so to have that support system too has been amazing. And having an admin that is very supportive and like, yo, like if this is what you need, go ahead and make it happen, has also been really helpful. So really collaborating with your administration to make sure that you can have these community supports has been super helpful.
So we want to think about a scenario here. So we want to give you the opportunity to take this into real life. And this is something that we have all experienced across all grade levels for sure. So imagine we were on campus. Students are sitting out in the quad listening to music during lunchtime. A song comes on as you are passing by that blurts out the N-word, in which students are singing along with it. What do? What is best practice for your school? What is the policy regarding slurs on your campus? So we've all been here. We've all been here. And so we are going to pop into some breakout rooms and take about 5 minutes to just discuss together maybe what you've done in the past, what you would want to do moving forward, because this has happened to all of us. So we're going to take about 5 minutes. And again, our scenario is just, you heard kids singing along to the N-word, you walked by, what do? What have you done in the past? So I'm going to open up these rooms. There's going to be about 4 or 5 of you per room. Just like we ask our students, please participate in the breakout rooms so that you can get the most out of it. So here they go. So it's about 11:42. So maybe we will give them, what time's the official, like
so
50?
at 11, yeah, so at
Okay.
what is it, 11:50?
Mm-hmm.
You'll still have the time, but
Okay.
at 11:55 the survey will go out, and then we'll close it up a little after, like probably 11:58 if you want to use that time.
Okay. We'll just give them, so can I let them be in the breakout rooms until like 11:48?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do that then. So much to say. So well, hopefully it gave you a little moment to kind of percolate, but as you're all flooding back in, I'm watching my participants number skyrocket in the chat box. Let's talk a little bit about it, or if you want to unmute, if you heard something that someone said that you want to share out loud, certainly we would welcome you to be brave and do that as well. But what are some things you heard? And maybe some of what you heard is, we don't have a plan for this, right? Like personally at my school, aside from like one-on-one conversations with students, kind of pulling them aside and stuff, like we don't really have a policy, or we have a policy written, but it's not really followed, right? And so what are some things that came up for all of you in your breakout rooms? First of all, I'm betting everyone was like, yeah, this has happened before. I walked by the kids at lunch and definitely heard this and either decided to be quiet or to intervene. So what do? What are some things that came up in the breakout room? Please share in the chat. Or Lacey, did you hear anything great?
I did, and I want to give us that space for other folks to share out. But I will say that there just wasn't enough time.
I know.
I was like, oh my God, there's only 30 seconds.
Can I share something?
Please.
So I work at a school with a lot of Black kids, and they use the word all the time with each other and sing the songs. And our principal's Black, and we kind of have a kind of security, kind of like helper person, and he's African American, and they tell the kids not to say it. But they do all day, every day anyway. Not so much, the principal's pretty tough, but I just kind of look at them and go, what are you doing? And then they kind of like tone it down, but it's kind of part of the culture of the kids. And so I'm kind of not, I'm kind of at a loss.
For the sake of time, because I want to tap in here, this has actually happened, of course, on my campus. And one of the things that we did some years ago, our Black Student Union students were actually upset that they were hearing it on campus. Yeah, they also had to like have the conversation about them saying it to one another on campus, because that's what they chose to do. But I think what the issue was that it wasn't being called out. And so they also had to do this internal look like, well, if we don't want other people to say it, like we have to do something about it. And so we started having these presentations that our counseling team developed about dehumanizing language. So whether it's homophobic language, whether it's slurs, whether it's the N-word, and we talked about that specifically because we know the history part of it, right? But we also know how disconnected students feel from the terror and the trauma that comes from that word. But one of the things that I have worked with teachers on is you have to talk about it. You have to call it out. If a student says it, let them know that that's not appropriate. And what I've told students in my presentations was there's a specific way that you can talk in your profession, right? You have to be able to code switch. That's a whole other presentation that can happen. And so in my professional space, I cannot talk to my boss or my colleagues the way I'm going to talk to my homies, that's what I tell them, outside of here, or my friends outside of here, because it's just not appropriate for that space. So this is your educational space. This is your educational professional space until you get a real job. And so in that educational space, there is certain language that you cannot use. You cannot come up to me and say, oh, my homie, or you can't. And if you slip up and say the N-word, we're going to have problems. So let's not use that word and continue to normalize it on our campus. I can't control what you do outside of here. But what I can say is that you need to use your educational language like I use my professional language, because you're going to respect me the way in how I speak to you. And if I come to you respectfully, you're going to respect me. But if I'm talking crazy, you're going to be like, Miss Lacey, what's happening here? Right. And so I wanted to just acknowledge that, one, we call it out, and two, we look at our systems or our policies in place, right, to be able to address dehumanizing language as a whole and say, this is not part of our educational space. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation. And allow time for questions too, because I think we have a couple more slides left. So.
Yeah, we do. All right, so we're gonna keep moving. One other thing that came up in the chat was just what are some of the unintended consequences of a zero tolerance policy? So kind of trying to stop students from using this language, but then what are some consequences that can come along with that? So it's another thing that came up. So we want to talk about considering our school policies with an anti-racist lens, because as leaders on campus, as advocates, we want to think about, how does your school counseling program create more equitable access to coursework? This is not just seeking out the student and then putting them in the class and forgetting about them, right? It's building up the capacity of the teacher to support maybe more non-traditional students that are in that class who might need more support. It's checking in with those students. It's building cohorts of students so that they see others that are like them, that are being successful. So how can your school counseling work to look at the master schedule? Consider who's being sent to alternative schools, look at credit recovery, and be brave enough as a school counselor, as a leader on that campus, to advocate for making real systemic change when it comes to these policies that we know are or disproportionately impacting our Black and Brown students. We also wanted just to kind of throw it out there. How does your school system use coded language, right? And how do we use that coded language to disguise racism? So when we say, oh, that's a Title I school, or all those kids are free and reduced, or That's a permit kid. I don't know what you call in San Diego County. That's what we call it if you like come in. What does that mean? What are we really saying by that? And how can we as school counselors work to disrupt that coded language to get people to say what they really mean so we can really have those honest conversations and get down to creating the best environment for our students that we can. So I think, are you gonna, did you put the, so Erin, do you need to jump in and share the final?
Yeah, as they're
Okay.
wrapping up, I'm going to put the session survey into the chat. So if you have a moment, just fill that out as they're kind of closing up here. And then we will close out at about noon.
Okay, great. All right, so we want to make sure that you're walking away with something to think about, an action item. So what would your goal as a counselor be to implement anti-racist best practices on your campus? So take the moment right now to think about what is something you could do right now during Zoom school to make this happen. And when we come back, right, as we're starting to think about, I mean, it's February. I always say it's February, it's June, right? Like the year's over, everything's already planned out. You're starting to think about master schedules. You're starting to think about scheduling. You're starting to think about identifying students for AVID, identifying students for honors programs, identifying students for over the summer support. So how can you implement some of what we learned here today to disrupt racism in those systems that exist? So in the chat, if anyone has a goal that they're thinking like, all right, I want to give this presentation to my staff. I want to have an honest conversation with my principal, right? Thank you so much. Yeah, currently I'm a co-leader for No Place for Hate committee. So look at a deeper dive on lessons. Lacey bringing up that dehumanizing language lesson. I'm like, well, now I have to do that, right? Like that makes so much sense. We have to give students the language to talk about what's happening. Awesome. So also joining different advisory committees. So this is amazing. We're seeing so much come in.
Awesome.
So joining different advisory committees, being cognizant of language used to describe the student, always using that student first language, of course. Pushing harder to break up clusters. That in and of itself, sometimes we have these long-standing systems that have happened on our campuses, and the idea of breaking things up, like you got to come ready to tell people why. So that's a great idea. Yeah. And also thank you for just, I see someone that their goal is just to have that honest conversation. And if that is what comes out of this, we would be so happy. If this presentation gets you to sit down with your admin and really start to talk about what's really going on your campus, that's the first step of this lifelong work for sure. Lacey, are you seeing anything else that you want to make sure we highlight?
Yes, being an active participant in our site anti-racist committee. Yes, so participating in committees where you might not feel comfortable, but you can learn and then you can share out that knowledge as well. Use this presentation. Yes, please do add to it. Let us know if you add some slides so we can then share with our communities as well. If there's any activities or resources, like we'd love to hear what you all are doing as well. So thank you all for joining us today.
We are so grateful you were here. We know you've got a full day of virtual Zooming around to do. So we're grateful for you here. We're grateful for your feedback. I'm going to share the presentation as soon as I stop sharing my screen. But these are our resources. I had one person in the chat mentioned really needing to do this work with like our white students, right? Or our non-BIPOC students. So this book, I just can't recommend it enough. It's called This Book is Anti-Racist. It is designed for teenagers, but as an adult, I found it immensely helpful. I'm going to do a book club on my campus and we're just going to go through it. There's a journal that accompanies it. So that's something to think about. And then if you have feedback or thoughts, or you just, something came up and you want to just like have a safe person to talk about it with, email us. There's Lacey's email and my email. I also have an Instagram account, which is called Two Blondes Counseling. And it is myself and my colleague that I do work with in Culver City. And we post lots of stuff there, lots of resources. So if you're looking for another Instagram account to follow, we would love to have you there. I'm going to stop sharing, Lacey, just so that I can share the in the chat box.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on behalf of San Diego County Office of Education, we thank you too for presenting at our counselor conference. We thank everyone who is here today to be part of this. You guys rocked the house. So thank you, Janine. Thank you, Lacey. We appreciate you sharing your resources and your knowledge with us. And as always, thank you to all of you that are out there, because it is your week and we want to recognize all the hard work that you do. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.